In our previous conversations about stewardship, we began in the Genesis 1 text. We thought about creation care. We thought about the earth being the Lord and the fullness thereof, that God speaks into being and creation happens. And we remind ourselves that we are a part of that creation and that God is the creator, the original owner of all things that we know in the cosmos. We looked at that text from several perspectives in Genesis 1, including the ability to establish an understanding that there is an abundance, that God has created a world with enough, so that all of creation can not just be sustained, but so that it can thrive. And God has placed the human creatures, you and I, in charge of what God has made, as stewards to be caretakers and managers. To be created in the image of God and to have dominion over all of the earth is to rule in the earth the way that God rules in the cosmos. As we thought more about stewardship, we talked about the idea of Sabbath and what it meant to observe Sabbath, both as a reminder of God's provision, that we work 6 days but have enough for 7, and the idea that in observing Sabbath, we remember that relationship. We remember that it is God who is the creator. And we, like God, get to rest on that 7th day. We also looked at stewardship from the standpoint of self-care. Sabbath being a part of that, but also the caretaking of our bodies, understanding that who we are is of value to God, that our bodies are of value, that for us to function at our best level, we need to take care of ourselves so that we can deploy the gifts we have to the best of our ability. When we talked about stewardship, we also thought about the gospel. And we thought about how it is that we are stewards of the good news of Jesus Christ, stewards of the gospel, the many-colored graces of God, and our responsibility as stewards to tell and share that story, that stewardship was in part evangelism. We, of course, looked at some other things related to stewardship in our previous sessions. We talked about generosity and the way in which that is displayed in the life of many people who encounter God and God's abundance and God's grace, and how it's displayed in the life of Jesus, that wherever Jesus happens to be, there's always enough. We also looked at some judgment texts around stewardship and what it meant to be fulfilling God's purpose and the consequences of our failure to be a good steward. So now we kind of want to wrap all of that up and look at stewardship as transformation. When we apply all of these things that we know, when we apply what it is that we know God desires for the world and how it is that the Holy Spirit enables that to happen, we see the world change. We change. One of the initial promises is held out to us in Isaiah in the 58th chapter. God says, "Is this not the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, to bring the homeless poor into your house when you see the naked to cover them, and to not hide yourself from your own kin? Then," God says, "your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard, and you shall call on the Lord, and God will answer. You shall cry for help, and God will say, 'Here I am.'" This is the vision that God holds out for the whole of creation, for human beings to be reconciled with one another, with the creation, and with God. In Luke's gospel, as we begin to look at the life of Jesus, we hear early on as Mary sings the song about this baby she carries within her womb, that the rich will be sent away empty and the hungry will be filled with good things. A promise that in the coming of Jesus, this hope and vision that God's had for all of us in creation will finally be realized, that it will be those who follow Jesus who make this happen. Jesus in his own ministry lifts up these same themes again in kind of an interesting way. Again, we look at Luke's gospel in chapter 7 when disciples of John the Baptist come to Jesus and on behalf of John, who at this moment is in prison, ask Jesus, "Are you the one or should we look for another?" And Jesus says, "Well, go and tell John what you see." The blind see, the deaf hear, the lame walk, and good news has been preached to the poor. The transformation is happening. The realm of God is coming near. It's happening in Jesus, and it's happening through Jesus and the Holy Spirit in the church. When we get to the book of Acts, which is the story of the church's history, we see in that second chapter the Holy Spirit arrives and everything is different. The 12 disciples are gathered in the upper room, afraid, locked in, locking out the world from around them, locking out the other folks. They are fearing for their lives, and when the day of Pentecost comes, they change and are transformed to being out in the street, proclaiming the good news of the gospel. And as their lives evolve into being the community of the church, the book of Acts tells us that they gathered together regularly, that they broke bread, and that they shared what they had with everyone. So there was no need. They proclaimed the gospel, and they shared the resources that they had, the abundance that they had, so there was no need. No one went without. This ultimately is what stewardship is about. When the church is proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ, that stewardship element of telling the story, when the church is acting as God desires so that no one is in need, change happens. The world changes, we change. And ultimately, that's what our stewardship is all about. As we care for God's creation and heal the land around us because of our commitment to love it the way that God does, when we care for ourselves because we matter to God and our bodies are the way in which we express ourselves in this material world, we care for them so they can be at their best. When we do these things, when we are attentive to the needs around us, it's all different. And it's what God desires. It is possible then for these great visions, these great hopes to be realized. And it's made possible by the Holy Spirit. It's made possible by our own commitment to be disciples, to be disciplined in the way in which we live, to choose how and what we do with the resources entrusted to us, so that the world as God dreams it to be becomes a reality for all of us in the end. That's what stewardship is really all about.